Do a pre-interview is tip number 2. I did this one video about 3 years ago about this heroin addict who got pregnant and she had a baby and she placed the baby for adoption. It was for Bethany Christian Services, which is an adoption agency here in the Chicagoland area. And they're nationwide, and I've been doing several videos for them, but this one particularly struck me because I had not done a lot of videos of drug addicts' stories, and so I was a little bit intimidated by it. And so I decided in this particular instance to do a pre-interview over the phone with them before we come out to shoot. How I had done it in the past, I didn't do a lot of pre-interviews in the past. Normally what I would do is I liked hearing the story from them on the spot while the cameras were rolling and asking them more questions and kind of getting it out of them from a not knowing anything point of view. And that used to be my preferred way of doing interviews. But one of the things that did for me was I have a natural skill in storytelling based on my theater background and directing and being involved in that. And so in terms of teaching other people how to do interviewing, I realized that not everybody has that natural skill or talent. And in this particular story, I was intimidated by what the story was going to be. So I wanted to kind of get my ducks in a row in terms of what is the story going to be before we arrive on set at her house and start filming. So we got on the phone, we talked. It was a 2.5-hour conversation. We started from when she was in high school all the way up to today, and there was so much in her story. She had gone to prison 3 times for 3 different offenses. One was like stealing it from Ace Hardware, and then one was stealing from a makeup store like JCPenney, and then one was for drug dealing. She had had 2 other babies prior to this baby that we were doing the story about. One of the kids she had still, one of the kids she had placed for adoption earlier with a different adoption agency. And she had been in and out of halfway house and had relapsed a couple times. And it was just like, it was so much. And I was doing like a 4-minute video for this adoption agency about how this adoption agency impacted her life and what happened with her story. And after I hung up the phone with this 2.5-hour conversation, I remember telling my wife, I don't know how I'm gonna do this, like how I'm gonna boil this down because there's just so much here. And what that really taught me was the value of a pre-interview, because I can, ahead of time, before I show up, kind of decide, okay, what am I gonna not use at all and what am I gonna use? And I can boil it down to these main points and kind of decide what my story is. And then when I sit down to do the video interview, we're not talking for 2 hours in the video interview, we're talking for 30 minutes or 40 minutes on just the stuff that I've already decided is gonna stay in the story. And we might delve into some other things in there, but I save time and I don't get a bunch of unnecessary content. What it also allowed me to do was figure out what is the B-roll list gonna be? Well, like what is the shot list of footage I want to shoot of her or of something else that I'm going to place over top of the story. Because I already know kind of what the story is now that I did a phone interview with her. And so I can pre-decide, let's have her smiling at the camera, let's have her walking down the sidewalk, or have her in this specific motel that she was talking about, or whatever. And then I can tell her, here's the plan, here's what we're going to shoot, and here's the time schedule of what we're going to shoot. And then we're not there forever, and I have reasonable time expectations, and it's all planned out. And that all comes from for me, that came from doing that pre-interview. Now, as I sit here today, sometimes I do pre-interviews and sometimes I don't. The instances where I definitely do a pre-interview is when I know I'm driving out to their place and I only have, maybe a few hours, maybe 4 or 5 hours, and I'm gonna get everything then. I'm gonna get the interview, I'm gonna get their footage, everything in one shoot. So I want to know ahead of time as much as possible, what's the story, what's the footage I need, and let's just get that all at the one shoot. Sometimes I'll do an interview where I show up and I do the interview, and then I edit their interview down video-wise, and then I'll go back and shoot the B-roll afterwards because we've got more flexibility in terms of when we're going to shoot that footage. In those instances, I may or may not do a pre-interview because I'm gonna edit their story down in video, not in script form. So that's tip number 2, do a pre-interview. Tip number 3, pre-plan a shot list after the pre-interview. Now, I kind of already mentioned this. So but I have a principle that I do with all of my videos, and the principle is this. I want to see the person in a story video. I want to see them talking as little as possible, and I want to see visuals that are telling the story more than I see the person. So my worst case scenario is 50% seeing them talk, 50% footage or visuals. If I had my way, I would do 90% visuals, 10% seeing them talk. Because at a certain point, seeing them talk becomes boring or less interesting, or what's the point of doing video? You can just have them come live and just tell their story live. What video is able to do is make it more cinematic or more like a film where you're getting lost in the story, and there's visuals that are supplementing what the person is saying. There's music that's supplementing emotion and making you feel certain things. And so I always prefer to have visuals as much as possible. So when you do the pre-interview, it gives you the chance to think about what are my visuals going to be, and here's what I'm going to shoot. Now I have some bonus tips for you here. Bonus tips under this. Number one bonus tip is do a shoot schedule. I also mentioned this a little bit earlier, but just to get more specific, for me, I give myself an hour to 2 hours for setup for an interview. 1 hour to 2 hours of setup and getting everything done. I use 3 camera angles typically, and we do boom mic and lighting and everything. And then I give myself a 1 hour for the interview, and then I give myself about 2.5 hours to shoot B-roll. So if you put all that together, 2 hours for setup, let's call it, 1 hour for the interview, and then 2 hours, 2.5 hours for the B-roll, then you got drive time, which brings you to your 8-hour day. Like drive 30 to 45 minutes out somewhere. If you need to build in lunch somewhere in there, you build in lunch. But doing a shoot schedule for me has been huge because I'm able to tell whether I'm behind or not. And it takes stress away from me when I know if I'm behind or not behind. Sometimes it adds stress because I know I'm behind now. But at least if I have some sort of a, here's what we're going to do, versus saying we're going to shoot this story video this day, that's what we're going to do. It's kind of nefarious as to, are we on schedule? Are we behind? Are we ahead? I don't know. But when I have a schedule, I just feel better. And then I'm also able to tell the person who I'm interviewing and the crew and everybody, here's the plan. It might change a little bit or tweak, but here's the plan. Let's try to stick to this plan as much as we can. So that's another bonus tip. And then bonus tip number 2, I guess it would be, is to use stock B-roll for visuals when you can't shoot the footage yourself. Like there's some footage you can shoot yourself. There's other footage, like they talk about, I did this trip to India and it was so life-changing. Well, maybe you can't fly to India. Maybe you need some stock B-roll footage of India that's beautiful and looks like India, and then you can put that over top of them, and it looks like you went to India, but you just used it from a stock footage site. I use that all the time to fill in gaps of my stories, like when I was in the hospital, or when I went to this place or did this place, or I always loved I don't know. You get the idea. I try to find B-roll shots that will supplement that I am unable to shoot myself, but that still gives me visuals to tell the story. My number one site that I use for stock footage is called videoblocks.com or storyblocks.com. They've also got audio samples, like sound effect things, and then they've got some music, I think, maybe too. I primarily use them for video stock footage because it's a set monthly fee or yearly fee, and you have unlimited downloads of any other content, which I find that to be great because I do this for a living. I have a creative video agency, so I'm using it all the time. So that's bonus tip number 2.